Let me paint a picture for you. You sit down to start an assignment. It's due in a few weeks, and you have plenty of time. Your computer is open, your schedule is cleared, and nothing should stop you from getting started, right? Except, instead of writing, all you can do is stare. It's suddenly all too real. You've done all your research and preparation, but now you understand the moment your fingers hit the keyboard, the final product will be set in motion. And frankly, you're paralyzed by the idea that what you're about to produce could be what you turn in. So, instead, you tell yourself, oh, I'm just not in the right mindset today. I'm sure I can get started tomorrow instead. If you find yourself relating, maybe you're like me, and you've wondered time and time again whether this makes you lazy. I've certainly been there, but I've now learned that what this paralysis is actually the result of is a few other demons getting in the way, and it's up to us if we choose to let them take control or not. Hi, my name is Ceren Gunaydin, and I asked to cancel this speech a week ago. I stared at that empty page and got in my own head, convincing myself that no lesson I came up with would be worth it. No delivery I could muster would be enough. But instead of tackling these doubts by actually sitting down and writing the speech, I let them take over my mind. But I'm here now, and I'd like to tell you about how I got wrapped up in this ever-growing avalanche of self-criticism and perfectionism for the last 2 years. Looking back, it all started with losing my confidence in art, something I'd been so comfortable with my whole life. Growing up, you could say I was an art kid. From the moment I could hold a pencil, I would draw, write, paint, create everything and anything that came to mind. Over time, I internalized creative as my natural descriptor. Think of those 3 words that describe you questions they always ask. You better believe the answer to each of mine would be creative, creative, and creative. I started to realize that I didn't know who I was if not creative. So when I entered the greatest slump of my life in grade 11 visual arts, I realized I was in for a journey that would redefine my entire identity. By the time I started high school, I'd already been drifting away from art, getting wrapped up in things I now believed were higher priority, letting academics distract me from my personal expression. But I was still in a position where all the technical skills I developed over the years were enough to get me by in visual arts. I wasn't particularly passionate about the art I was making in school, but this apathy had never really bothered me before. However, that did change when I started visual arts in senior 1 and found myself faced with an assignment that asked why I loved making art. The task was to fill out a page of questions about our motivations and inspirations and then paint over it, integrating words from our answers into the final piece. This wasn't my first time staring at a brainstorming page and not knowing how to start an assignment, but it honestly was the first time that I looked around the classroom and saw the way that ideas seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. Of course, in retrospect, I know this is certainly not true, but this was the sort of thinking that I found myself trapped in. Have you ever stared at the works of past Appleby artists? The flawless landscape paintings you may see in the dining hall, or the beautiful teapots in the art room? As a grade 9, I'd seen them and thought, I can't wait to get to that point someday. Of course, there was such a disparity between the skills of those artists and little 15-year-old me, but at the time, I kind of assumed that that was a given, that by the time I got to that age, the visual arts curriculum would naturally take me to that skill level, that all I had to do was commit to the course and the rest would fall into place. Fast forward to senior 1, and imagine little 17-year-old me, feeling like an absolute idiot trying to rebuild a stubborn, ugly clay teapot that had just exploded in the kiln for the 3rd time. I didn't feel older, or wiser, or more skillful than the upper one who had idolized the senior artists. Instead, I just felt like I'd stayed stuck, staying at the same level of skill, maturity, and experience as time and others passed me by. And now I was forced to tackle assignments that were clearly supposed to be for more talented and refined artists, not me. Because I started to be unhappy with myself, I started to think that if my product wasn't perfect from the get-go, I was an embarrassment. I'd sit with my sketchbook open and try to think of perfect ideas off the bat. But guess what? It's impossible to start anything if you expect to start from perfect. Visual arts wasn't the only thing that challenged this perfectionism. Senior one was also the year I happened to start this fun little course called Capstone. So there I was, the day before the deadline of my first ever research paper, staring at a document containing a draft I believed was nowhere near perfect. So, naturally, at 10 p.m. before the day it was due, I made the worst and most typical mistake any high schooler can make. Any guesses? Yeah, I delayed the whole thing and started over, writing and writing until 4 a.m., as I'm sure many of you can relate. Staying up like that was not something I'd ever done before, and it was completely reckless. But the worst part was that what I came up with was somehow actually passable. And who knows if that was by luck or some miracle, but the fact that my teacher liked that last-minute essay turned out to be some sort of curse disguised as a blessing. It set a precedent for my work ethic that would be very, very hard to break, because starting from scratch had helped me go straight from a blank page to perfect. It seemed like there was no point in fixing what wasn't broken. This method would work. Those who know me now know that I've since developed this little habit of not starting any assignment until the last possible moment. I'm not telling you this because it's something I'm proud of, or something I choose, or even something that I think works well. I really don't think it does. I'm telling you this because I know that almost every single one of you here have been told simply to not procrastinate. It's definitely easy for others to say, but those who've experienced true procrastination know that the hardest thing is to understand why you can't just sit and put paintbrush to paper or brain to Word doc and just write. Every time I had to write an essay, I would try. I would really try to start it early, but the only thing that could ever get me going was the panic and adrenaline that set in when I realized time was running out. My parents would tell me over and over to just sit down at least a week before the deadline and start writing the paper, without worrying about perfection or the end result, even if it lacked polish, coherence, or, God forbid, proper APA citations. But I was completely convinced it was black and white. I could only put in either no effort or maximum effort. It seemed like there could be nothing in between. This process would destroy me, but as long as I kept managing fines grades as a result, I found myself unable to change. Everything, except my mental health, seemed to work out no matter how much I would put off my assignments, almost to a magical degree. I remember I jokingly told my mom, "It feels like I'm tethered to this magical doppelganger who has all the skills that I lack, and she's the one that gets it all done. But she only steps in at midnight before the assignment is due, and before then, I'm on my own." In all those times I was left on my own, I found myself hostage to my own feelings of inadequacy. I would sit down and block out a chunk of time to work on a project, and this is where the perfectionism-rooted procrastination got sneaky. When I told myself I just didn't feel productive today, I'd instead fall into some sort of limbo state where I kept researching, reading, watching others work, hoping that they'd inspire and spring me into action, even though they only dug my hole of unproductivity deeper. None of these felt unproductive, but they definitely weren't getting me to write the essay either. It always felt a lot easier to stay in the brainstorming page than to actually start the final product, because there's no expectation to be perfect just yet. At the start of the year, I signed up for a chapel speech simply because I wanted to challenge myself. I've always been critical of my public speaking, sure, and I wanted to take a big leap to show myself that it'll work out fine, that I can connect with you no matter how much I shake or stutter or feel so scared it seems I've suddenly forgotten how to pronounce basic English words. That was a healthy mindset, but of course it quickly unraveled the closer I got to the day. Within my struggling attempts at achieving perfection, I often lost all sense of planning and priority. Everything going on in my life always seems to demand chunks of my time, with every assignment tearing out bits and pieces of me until there's no energy left to get every single thing done. As a last-ditch effort to stay afloat, I convinced myself that this chapel speech must be the root of all my unmanageable stress, because then what else could it be? While drowning in these worries, I had a chat with Mr. Cambray about wanting to cancel. I was sure that I needed this off my plate to survive the rest of the battles that I'd have to fight this week, pushing down all the reasons that I had wanted so badly to do this in the first place. At the start of the year, this opportunity had meant so much more. It had promised reflection, challenge, connection. But now I found it had been reduced to a scapegoat for my impossible standards and insecurity. I thought about it for a whole week, characteristically unable to make up my mind on this decision. In the end, I backed out and tried my best to make peace with it. Later that week, when I sat down to do all my other work, the ones that had seemed so stressful, I expected to feel a positive relief without the additional pressure of the speech. Instead, I found myself filled with regret, restlessness, and disappointment in myself for letting my perfectionism get in the way of yet another opportunity. It's been said, the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And I think if I had listened, this speech would never have seemed so treacherous in the first place, and I could have saved myself a whole deal of panic and Mr. Cambray a whole deal of inconvenience. After all this, I believe the root problem isn't procrastination or even perfectionism, but the refusal to learn from these experiences. Time and time again, we fall into panic the day before an assignment, and it feels like the world is crashing down. But at the end of the day, we always get it done and forget about it in a week. However, does knowing firsthand that everything always works out ever stop you from repeating the ritual of panic for every new challenge? It really doesn't for me. After all this time, I should definitely know by now that the biggest hurdle of any task is starting, and that every challenge or responsibility or assignment will look infinitely bigger if you don't sit down and start tackling it. I should have definitely known when trying to cancel this speech that if I had just started writing it, it would never have seemed that challenging or treacherous. But every time I found myself in this situation, whether it be an essay or an artwork or a speech again, I seemed to lose all sense and lessons from my previous experiences. So I'm here to tell you that it's easy to lose all your senses in the face of difficulty, especially at a school like Appleby. We often think that a test is the end of the world, but no matter how much we panic, cry, study, or lose sleep, I guarantee you that none of us will remember after a month. When your emotions are angry and loud and your thoughts are restless and irrational, I want you to let your experiences speak. Remember that you had made it seem infinitely bigger in your head by thinking of it instead of doing it. And if that doesn't work, if you're still too caught up in the panic of the moment, turn to the people around you to remind you. I assure you, they'll guarantee that nothing means the end of the world, and they'll remind you that you've lived through this exact same thing before. Think of what all your experiences are trying to teach you, and do not forget them the next time you feel like letting perfection get in the way of your progress. Now please stand and sing hymn 656.